Hi everyone and welcome back to my channel. Today I want to talk about audiobooks. Before we get started, I just want to say a quick thank you to everyone who has subscribed recently because I got about 100 subscribers within a week the other day and it's just made me so happy. So thank you so much to everyone who has recently subscribed. But let's get into today's video, which is going to be all about audiobooks. So I love audiobooks. I think they're amazing to be able to read while you're multitasking, and I think that it's a great way to consume some stories. I usually read around at least one audiobook a month, but maybe 2 or 3, and then sometimes I go crazy in a month and read like so many books on audiobook if I find a good amount of audiobooks like that are free from my library. So today I want to talk you through my top 10 audiobooks that I think that you will really enjoy, especially if you are newer to audiobooks, that you don't really listen to them usually. I think these are a great place to start. Or if you do read a lot of audiobooks, then you know that some are done a lot better than others. And for me personally, there's kind of a personal preference with which books you like to listen to instead of read. But personally, I really like to listen to slower paced stories. For fast paced stuff like romances or thrillers or anything like exciting and pacey, I prefer to read that physically. But for longer, slower stories, I would love an audiobook because it just really helps me get through them. So for me, that is longer, slow, kind of lyrical fantasy stories, non-fiction books, and also classics. And so they are the categories that we are going through today. I'm going to give you recommendations in each of these categories, and also at the end I'm going to give you 2 other recommendations of just audiobooks that I think have been done exceptionally well and you should read them anyway. And also, if you don't usually read these 3 genres, so fantasy, kind of longer fantasies, classics, or non-fiction, then this might be a really fun way to get started in this genre if you do like audiobooks. So I'm going to start off today with some classics, and the reason I love reading classics via audiobook is because something about it like feels like it's kind of like a bedtime story. Lots of classics really do well with being spoken aloud, especially when they have a very good narrator. Also, often with a classic, it's kind of difficult sometimes to understand the tone and kind of some of the dialogue or what's going on in different books. When you're being like kind of dropped into a classic, it can be a little bit more difficult to kind of orientate yourself. And I do think that listening to classics is a much easier way to understand the tone of the story when you're having it kind of performed by a very good narrator. And I think that also some of them can be a bit long and a bit wordy, and I feel like it matters less if you're a bit like me where you kind of get distracted and you don't listen to every single sentence when you're listening to an audiobook. With a classic book, you're kind of fine if you miss a sentence here or there because they're pretty wordy anyway, and they're pretty slow paced. You'll kind of get the idea of the story anyway. So if you are multitasking, like, you're not going to have to like pause and go back. It's not going to be really overly complicated plot wise because they are quite wordy, at least in my experience. So the 3 classics I really want to recommend on audiobook are actually all 3 named after women. So make your guesses now which 3 classics this is going to be. But number 1, I really want to recommend Rebecca. So Rebecca is about this young woman who quite quickly marries a wealthy man and goes to live with him in Manderley, which is a beautiful and ancient old house. But our unnamed main character quickly realizes that the house and her husband are still strongly under the influence of his first wife, who has been dead for a year. This one is a gothic book. It's creepy, it's exciting, and I think it's a great place to start with classics in general, and the audiobook is also done very well in my opinion. But if gothic is not your thing and you'd rather something more like a romantic comedy, then could I suggest Emma by Jane Austen, which is one of my favourite books of all time. This book follows Emma Woodhouse, who is a beautiful and rich young woman, and she gets mixed up when trying to matchmake everyone in her circle, but she herself insists that she never wants to get married. So it's such a fun one. I love Jane Austen and I love Emma in particular. It's so funny and I love the kind of character arc that the main character goes on in this story. I love Emma, and it's just such a fun romantic comedy that I don't feel it's often described as a romantic comedy because it's a classic. But if you are new to classics as well, this is also a great place to start, and I do think that you'll just fall in love with Emma because she is such a fun character to kind of hate on but also love at the same time. Next up, I want to talk about Jane Eyre. Jane Eyre is by Charlotte Bronte, and it's another one of my absolute favourite books. Surprise, surprise. But I think this one also works really well as an audiobook. So in this book, you're following Jane Eyre, who has a difficult childhood. She is thrown from place to place and she grows up in a boarding school under very harsh conditions. So Jane eventually finds work as a governess looking after the daughter of a very wealthy gentleman, and they have what you could call an original enemies to lovers kind of storyline, but there's also many other unexpected things that happen in the plot, and it's actually just such a wild ride and such a fun read. But also the thing that makes it one of my favourite classics is Jane's internal narration. So she just comes across on the outside as this very plain and simple girl, but she really has this exciting and insightful life of the mind, and I just love the way that her internal narration comes across. And there are so many iconic lines in this that I'm not sure that you'd even realise come from Jane Eyre, but I do think that you should read the source material, or better than that, listen to it, because it's a great audiobook as well. Next up, I want to talk about non-fiction, and I've got 3 non-fiction to recommend to you today, and they are all amazing audiobooks. I've listened to all of them as an audiobook, and they're all quite different, so depending on what type of non-fiction you prefer, hopefully one of these will work for you. One is a memoir, one is a more scientific one, and one is a more data science-y, also kind of political one. So we'll start off with the science historical one, and that is The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. So this book tells the story about Henrietta Lacks, who died when she was 31 of an aggressive form of cervical cancer, and she died in 1951, but cells that were taken from her tumour while she was alive were cultured in a lab and found to be immortal, which started the healer cell line. This book is so interesting. It touches on science and communications and history and engineering and medicine, and it's also just really, really well told and well put together. It balances the personal side of Henrietta Lacks' life with also the science and the medicine about how these cells are used currently, and I think it's really, really interesting. So if you are interested, definitely pick it up and try it out as an audiobook. The next book I want to talk about is Invisible Women, and the longer tagline to this book is Exposing Data Bias in a World Designed for Men. So this book just takes a huge deep dive into this gender bias in data collection. Her findings range from things that would be slightly inconvenient to things that would seriously up your chances of dying. It looks at this gender data gap from government policy to city planning to technology and medicine and in workplaces and the media, and I think honestly this one will surprise you and enrage you like it did me, but it is such an interesting and really important read, and another one that I think is very well done on audiobook. So the final book I want to talk about for an audiobook is a memoir, and this is one I read recently, and I think that it's just a very, very well done memoir, and also the author is the one that reads the book, which I always think is a really nice way to listen to an audiobook when it's someone talking about their own personal life. And the book I'm talking about is I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jeanette Mcurdy. So in this book, she's recounting her days as a childhood Nickelodeon star all the way up until her current life, but she really focuses on her really complicated relationship with her mother. The reason I think that this book is particularly well done, and I think it's a good audiobook, is because it is a dark subject matter and it's often talking about traumatic things that have happened in Jeanette Mcurdy's life, but because she's reading it herself and a lot of the way that she copes with her life is through dark humour, I think the way that she's telling the stories, you can kind of almost listen to it as if she is a friend that's telling you a story about her life, and she tells it in such a way that she uses this dark humour to almost lighten up or reveal some kind of deep truths about herself as well. I also think this is really well done because as you're reading, the writing style slightly changes. So when you're from the perspective of her when she's 6 years old, it's kind of written in a very simple way. The way that she views her relationships, the way that she views the world is very simple and childlike, and it develops as the book goes along. So this is why I think it's one of the best memoirs I've read recently, and I think you should pick it up as an audiobook. So the next couple of books I want to talk about are slightly longer, more lyrical or atmospheric fantasy stories. So I love listening to these as audiobooks as well. And in fact, the first book I want to talk about, I am currently listening to on an audiobook, and that book is The Bear and the Nightingale. So I am currently about 80% through this book and I've been absolutely loving it, and I'm really glad that I chose to actually listen to it. I got a copy from my library and I'm really, really enjoying listening to this story for so many reasons, because also it has a very slow, very atmospheric start to the book. I think that it really suits an audiobook, and also because a lot of it is focused on magic and folklore and myth. I think that it's really nice having that kind of that storytelling auditory kind of vibe to the story being told to you. So basically this book is about a village that lives in the north of Russia on the edge of a huge forest, and you mainly follow one girl, Vasya, as she grows up, and she is the only person who can see the spirits that guard her home and her family and her neighbours as well. And you're following Vasya as she grows up, but also you're following as different people come to the village, like a priest who wants to convert more of the old ways into Christianity. And a lot of the story is this push and pull between the old gods and the new, and it's just really wonderfully written, and it's also great for this time of year because it's a deep winter story, so it's really fun to listen to in winter. So I can't say what I'm going to rate this as, but I know that I am going to rate it very highly, and I've been really enjoying it as an audiobook. And then next up I have a book that for similar reasons I think is also really good as an audiobook, and it is The Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern. This is such a fun and layered and atmospheric story all about this boy Zachary who finds a library book, and it basically tells the story of his own life. And he's trying to unravel this mystery and comes into contact with many different groups of people and an underground labyrinth that is filled with stories, which is being threatened by outside forces, and only a few people are trying to protect it. This is just such a fun story full of imagination, and I think that it does really well listening to it as well, because it just builds this beautiful world full of places and characters that you end up really caring about. And I just think it's an enchanting and lovely read, and you should definitely pick it up as an audiobook, because that's how I originally read it, and I think that it is so well suited. So the final two books that I want to shout out are just two books that I have randomly read as an audiobook, and I think that they were just done extremely well. And the first is a sci-fi, and it is The Martian by Andy Weir. So you might already know this story from the movie, but even if you have watched the movie already and you really liked it, I would still say it's definitely worth reading this book. The Martian is basically about a man who is on a space mission with his crew on Mars, and because of a tragedy they have to leave him behind, and he basically has to stay on Mars all by himself and try and survive. But the audiobook is just done in such a fun way. The voice acting is really incredible, and it has so much humour, and it's really unique how it's done. I also would say that Andy Weir's other book that I've read, Hail Mary, has a similar really good audiobook. I actually think that as an audiobook works even better for reasons I'm not going to go into because it slightly spoils the plot. But for me, if I had to pick a favourite out of the two books, The Martian would be superior to me as a story, so that's the one I'm going to recommend to you. And finally, I also recently read this book, and it's a young adult murder mystery, and it was so much fun, and I was surprised at how good the audiobook was as well. I really wanted to include it in this video as well, and that is A Good Girl's Guide to Murder. So this is slightly different to the other ones on this list because, like I said, I usually like to read kind of more fast-paced books, and this is quite fast-paced, but I just do think that it's quite unique in the sense of how it's done as an audiobook, because not only does it have a pretty full cast as an audiobook, meaning each different character has a different voice, it also is done through kind of police recordings and interviews, and it's just put together in really a very fun and very realistic way, and I just really enjoyed listening to it as an audiobook. This is basically about a young girl, and she's decided for her school project she is going to try and investigate a cold case that happened in her town, because she believes that everyone, including the police, got it wrong when they investigated it years ago. And the final book that I want to recommend is probably one that you already expected to have on this list, because it's kind of iconic in the fact that it's very well done as an audiobook, and it is Daisy Jones and the Six. This is actually one of the first audiobooks that I ever listened to, and I'm so glad that I did, because once again it's done as a full cast recording, and it's also done interview style. I honestly think I would have rated this book a lot lower if I would have read it physically, but I had to rate it higher because the experience of listening to it was so much better. Daisy Jones and the Six basically follows this band that got really famous in the 70s, and it is a reporter asking the band questions. So it's Taylor Jenkins Reid, so it's fun and it's gossipy and it's celebrity culture, but it's also really based around the music. So if you are curious about this book, definitely pick it up as an audiobook. Okay, so they are the 10 or 11, I think, different books that I want to recommend to you as audiobooks. Please let me know if you've read or listened to any of these books. I'll be really interested to know. Let me know your favourite, or maybe one that you want to pick up now after this video. And also please remember to subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you so much, it means so much to me. And that's all from me today, so I will talk to you again soon. Bye!